trying to understand what wildly gesticulating pointing finger means.
It's you.
Hello and welcome to the third episode of Brothers of the Serpent, where we discuss all manner of things, all manner of ways, for all time. I am Russ Allen, and this is my brother,
Kyle Allen. Glad you're here.
Oh yeah, we are in our 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science.
The fine tangent cube it is in green.
That's right, tangent cube in green.
And not in the energy-saving way.
And somewhere in here is a snake.
Yep.
All right.
It's our bro.
So, briefly went through the news feed. Doesn't look like there's much interesting, not anything that I want to really discuss on the show this time. So, no flat earthers, no moon hoaxers. We just move straight on to discussion topics. And you had something about the end of the last show that you wanted to talk about, so let's go ahead and do that.
Okay. So we were discussing the monomyth, all of the ancient texts being like parables that tell one story while hiding some fundamental truth of another story, origins or procession inside the story. And I was at one point in the podcast saying how I aspired to do the same thing that these sages did in taking some of this ancient wisdom and trying to encode it into lyrics of my songs, like the ancients did with their, allegories or their archetypal characters, and it is something that I want to do, but it's a new thing for me. So anyway,
it's a lot harder too with with lyrics because it's so short. It's like a little tiny sketch, really.
Right.
Compared to the ancient texts that have pages and pages and pages with thousands of words. So
right. So when we were mixing down the show, I was putting in some bumper music that's original, and one of the
by the way, all the music is original.
Yeah,
we should say that.
Yeah, we should say that.
Mixed, performed, written by me,
and previously unreleased. So these songs that you hear will be eventually released on an album.
That's right. But you guys are getting them first.
Yeah. So anyway, I decided to put one of the tidbits of music that I had in the middle of the podcast. I decided at the very end of the show to just let the whole song play out. And when I was reviewing the whole show, we got to the end of the podcast, and Russ was talking about a dream he had where he had seen the Pillars of Enoch, and it was a very powerful dream, and he was able to interpret the what was written on the pillars, and he understood it in the dream, understood like all of this entire massive lost civilization, all the people gone from some cataclysm, and it was just very, very powerful. And then at the end, this song that I had written called Gone plays all the way through, and I'm listening to the lyrics of the song, which I wrote about two people in particular who have passed away. But the way I wrote the lyrics perfectly matched all of these different elements of what we had been talking about in the podcast and things that we think about all the time, like the gods leave and they promise to return. There's parts of the lyrics that talk about a promise to return. There's certain phrases that sound like they're describing procession or the great year.
Yep.
In terms of, but one of the lyric lines is, "Long are my days."
Right. So the gods lived a long time.
And a day in the great year is 72 years long, which is the average lifespan of a human.
Right. Long are my days.
So long are my days, and I just like every line of the lyrics matched perfectly with some element of this big
and there's
story.
cataclysm in there. I'd hope you'd stay, but the wind swept you away.
Yep, the wind swept you away, and then for the gods returning, like I thought of, like the Aztecs, when what the Quetzalcoatl or whatever.
Yeah, the Aztecs and the Inca waiting for Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl. Yeah,
and he had promised to return, and they had waited so long, but they still remembered him, and then. Even to the point that when they thought Hernan Cortez was him, they just gave him the keys to the city and just like, here,
Yeah.
And then their entire civilization was then wiped out.
Man, we could talk about that too.
Yeah. So I like part of the song is saying after, I promise to return, but when I finally do, the time took you away.
Yep.
And anyway, it was just really, really cool that I realized, like, man, I was already doing that in one way. Like, I didn't do it intentionally, but they fit perfect.
How's that for a synchronicity?
Yeah.
You synchromystics out there.
And we had also talked about in the last podcast about briefly we touched on the 4 levels of language, which was something that Russ had read to me. I don't. We'll get to it at some point in a future podcast probably, but it was about these sages that had spoke about these 4 different levels of language, and they were saying that most people speak only and understand only the first level,
the top level. Yeah.
They understand the top level, but even in speaking that top level, they are also speaking in the
top level. Top level being surface, so they understand the surface level of language. Yeah.
But they're also speaking in the lower 3 levels,
the 3 deeper levels. Yeah.
that someone who has the knowledge can understand.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. I was just like, man, was I writing in one of the subsurface levels, not even knowing it, and only realizing.
Well, yeah, according to those sages, you always are, right?
Yeah. So that was just really cool.
We discovered one of the deeper meanings.
Yeah. And so now I love podcasting, you know what I'm saying? But that was it.
Yeah, that was really cool.
The thing I really wanted to discuss in this podcast is the dating methods that are used in archaeology mainly. But Russ knows a pretty good deal about it, and I wanted him to explain some of that.
All right. Prepare for rant.
Go, Snakebros.
Okay, so the main type of dating that we always hear about is carbon dating, and what that basically means, it's called cosmogenic dating, which basically means that the type of carbon that we're using to date is cosmogenically generated. Okay, and so to explain that, basically, every star is like our sun has a fusion process going on within it, and it's generating it starts with hydrogen, but it generates all these elements using fusion, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, everything, helium, and up to iron. Okay. Once it reaches iron does not, when iron fuses, it will fuse, but the fusion process with iron doesn't release more energy than it takes to fuse, which is what all the ones below that do. So iron actually begins to dampen the fusion fire of the sun. So iron is the ash of stars. Okay, so basically, as the star continues to burn, it develops more and more iron within it, and that iron slowly sort of rains or falls to the core of the star. But once there's enough of that iron ash mixed in with all the fusion materials or whatever, there's enough of it to begin to block the fusion energy from being able to pass from two fusing atoms to another atom to make it fuse. So it basically starts casting shadows in there, and that will eventually cool the star enough to where there's no longer enough heat and explosive energy from the fusion to keep the core of the star. And this is weird. I know people are like, why are you talking about star fusion when we're going dating? Trust me, we'll get there. Anyway, eventually no, this is not a tangent.
I know.
You have to go here. Yeah,
I'm joking.
Eventually what happens is the iron core of the star will collapse. It undergoes like a catastrophic implosion, which that would be a nova or a supernova, depending on the size of the mass of the star. So anyway, once enough iron has developed in the star, that will cool it enough to where the heat can no longer keep it expanded against its own force of gravity. So the core will collapse. That implosion results in a shockwave that blows all the external material off the star in a supernova explosion. And in that explosion, there are small areas of the explosion that are so powerful, even relative to the rest of the explosion, that it will it will tear molecules and atoms apart and toss out individual subatomic particles with ridiculous accelerations. So even though you'll have a massy particle like a photon or a neutron, which have a lot of mass for small particles, but they will be thrown out at almost light speed. And so for something with mass, when you go close to light speed, what happens as you approach light speed, you're instead of continuing to go faster, what happens is your mass begins to increase, right? So sometimes these single tiny subatomic particles can be thrown off of a star with the same like equivalent inertia as like a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. Now think about that. A tiny subatomic particle having the same impact strength if it hit you as if you'd been hit by a 90-mile-an-hour fastball thrown by a professional pitcher, right?
Wow.
Okay? So if it hit you, you'd be like, poof, oh. It'd knock you out. So
I don't want to play quantum ball.
I don't want to play quantum baseball. So these particles are known at when they impact Earth, they go burning across space like hauling ass, all fat with this relativistic energy or relativistic mass, and they just fly straight until they hit something, and a lot of them will Earth gets hit by these all the time, and we call them cosmic rays when they do, and that's because there was a misunderstanding when we first were noticing them, and that's because they do kind of look like some kind of weird ray when they impact. Because imagine you got a Maserati, all right, and you're on the Autobahn, and you've got the gas punched to the floor, and you're going 215 miles an hour just out there on that empty freeway. That's fine, but when you start getting close to a city, if you don't slow down and you get into all this traffic, what happens? Wham! You start hitting cars, bam, 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 and those cars, because of your inertia, they get thrown forward and they hit other cars and start smashing it. So that's what happens when a cosmic ray, a single tiny subatomic particle, comes into the upper atmosphere of Earth. It begins to slam into the particles of our atmosphere, which then kicks those things off, tears molecules and atoms apart, and throws it in. So you get this massive, kind
of like a cone almost.
Yeah, there's a cone of just particles flying and slamming into each other that will often extend all the way to the surface, okay, of the planet. It'll burn all the way, In that process of all these particles running into each other because of this single asshole flying really fast, okay, this is where you develop unstable, in other words, radioactive isotopes of otherwise normal elements. So that's how we get carbon-14, okay? So carbon normally is not 14, it's 8, I think. But the 14 basically means it has a bunch of other particles added to its nucleus because of this cosmogenic thing happening. So like a couple of neutrons and a proton or two get added to its nucleus because of the excess energy from this cosmic ray. Chemically, it's exactly the same as carbon, so it will attach to oxygen and generate and eventually turn into CO2. And CO2 is what plants breathe. So it will then join the carbon cycle of the life cycle of Earth, okay? So, CO2 dating, and because it's unstable, it's radioactive, it has a half-life, right? So it will decay eventually. Now because of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle or whatever, you can't ever know when an individual radioactive atom will decay, but you can point to a bunch of them and know statistically how many of them will decay over a certain amount of time. That's the half-life. So the idea of carbon dating is when something is alive, when any organic thing is alive, it's constantly pulling in carbon, right? It's pulling in carbon as we don't breathe it, but we eat it with the plants because the plants breathe it, right? So the plants breathe the carbon in, and some of that carbon will be carbon-14, the radioactive kind. We eat the plants or whatever. So this carbon-14 from these cosmic rays gets spread out evenly into all life on Earth. So the theory is that once a particular life form dies, it ceases to pull in carbon. So that is the amount of carbon it has in it, and then that carbon begins to decay. So from that point on, the theory is that you can then time how long it's been since it died based on how much of the carbon is decayed.
Because it's no longer taking in any new ones.
Right. So, there are so many problems with that, even though it's a cool idea.
Yeah. Cool idea, guys.
Right. Great idea, guys, but lots of problems. Number one, we're not single-celled life forms. Okay? And if you're anything bigger than a single-celled life forms, you have millions of single-celled life forms in you that aren't dead when you die, and they are continuing a carbon cycle.
True.
Okay? So if I keel over and die right now, yes, myself as a single functioning being ceases to pull in carbon, but all the stuff that's in me that's still alive, all the gut flora and the, plus everything that starts to come over to eat me, like flies start laying eggs and everything, that all has carbon cycles still going. So it doesn't really
So it's not accurate to the day. Or...
Right. So this is why whenever you see a carbon date, they'll give you a plus or minus 1,000 years, 1,600 years, whatever. But even that, this is the main problem with the theory, and this is a physics problem, okay? The physics problem with the theory is that the influx of carbon rays, carbon rays, wow, cosmic rays, the influx of cosmic ray particles into the Earth's atmosphere is, we have this average amount based on the beginning of Earth's life to however long. In other words, across the age of the universe, you can say this average amount of cosmic ray particles will impact any given planet at any given point.
Right.
But that you can't use that. You can't use that for any given day. Like the problem with that, like
so that's a you were saying like on average over the whole universe or whatever. So you're talking about way longer periods than we're carbon dating for.
Right. Not only that, but it's like, so the age of the universe right now is theorized to be about 14 billion years. So over the past 14 billion years age of the universe, you can say that an average number of cosmic ray particles will impact any given object in the universe. Okay.
Right.
Based on a bunch of other physics that basically says the universe is homogeneous. Okay. So there's a whole lot of assumptions that go into this. Like the fact
But if you're trying to date something that's say 12,000 years old.
Right, so here's the problem. The dating window for carbon-14, which is based on carbon-14's half-life, which is, the half-life allows us to date up to about 60 to maybe to 100,000 years max. After 100,000 years, there's not enough carbon-14 left because of decay for you to count, okay?
Right.
So, the entire age of the universe is a lot different than 100,000 years.
Right.
In the same way that, like, I could say, well, I drank an average of 3 cans of soda today, right? But what if I drank all 3 cans of those soda at lunch? So if you looked at any given hour of my life during that day and decided that I was drinking an average of a certain amount of soda during all that period based on... No, it would be wrong because I drank all the soda at one spot and then no soda the rest of the day. Right. So... Cosmic rays are caused by supernova explosions. Definite events in space that are nearby us or whatever, right? Or, they don't have to be nearby because a cosmic ray particle can come from some long dead, extremely distant star. But the point is that there will be more of them sometimes than others, especially ones that are close.
Right.
We know in historical times because, the Chinese recorded over 1,000 years ago a bright supernova in the sky. And while they're seeing the light from that supernova, the Earth was also getting bombarded by all the cosmic ray particles coming from it because they would kind of be together. So here's the point.
Wait, can I add something?
Yeah.
I was reading that the solar activity right now is at a minimum. It's like the sun is just like,
that's right.
The sun is just blank. There's no sunspots. And what they said in there was because the sun was blank and we don't have all these crazy magnetic, additional magnetic...
The solar flux.
Solar flux and wind and whatever is very light right now. So we are... far more
vulnerable or getting bombarded by
cosmic rays. So there could be additionally like the sun could have been calm or super calm for 1,000 years, and then it could have just had crazy activity for the next 10,000 years.
Absolutely right. And you can't average
that out. So you can't average
either.
that out. If you, okay.
Right. So you have an average number of cosmic ray particles that may hit any given object over the course of the universe, but that doesn't count any local effects that may stop or may impede or not impede those cosmic ray particles from hitting it. And that was what we have at the sun. The heliosheath, which is basically a shield around the entire solar system caused by the solar wind outfluxing from the sun, blocks a lot of cosmic rays from impacting the planets. So when our sun has tons of sunspots and it's throwing crap out there and it's flipping out and exploding everywhere, cosmic rays are getting blocked a lot. Okay, right. They're getting deflected. When it's really calm, like it has been for the past couple of years, there's not a lot of blockage, so cosmic rays are hitting us a lot more. And that there's cloud formation may be caused by cosmic rays, and so. This is really interesting to me. Storm cells, like when you get a crazy thunderstorm that just seems to come out of nowhere and it's just boom and all this energy and stuff, that was one cosmic ray particle impacting the atmosphere causing that storm. So basically that storm is the result of a supernova somewhere way back in time, really far away.
That's freaking awesome.
And so you're like that tiny particle from that supernova and all that energy that the storm puts out. Yeah. That tells you how powerful supernovas are. But anyway.
So at your next wedding, when the storm just busts out of nowhere, you can be like, damn cosmic rays.
Yeah. You can be like, that's right, this star exploded for my wedding. right? So the point I'm getting to here is that cosmogenic particle dating is a good idea, but it isn't really workable because at the time that animal died that you're trying to date, there could have been a massive influx of cosmic ray particles because of sun activity or because of nearby explosions or whatever. And so that thing may have a lot more carbon-14 in it just because of the amount of it that was in the atmosphere when it died, which would throw your dating off. You would think it was a lot younger than it was because you would read it and be like, wow, it has a lot of carbon-14, right? And you would say, well, maybe it's only 500 years old when it's actually like 6,000 years old. But it would just had a ton of carbon-14 in the air.
Or for example, something dies when there's very few cosmic rays impacting.
Right.
And then something that was alive at the same point lives on for another, say 50 years and there's tons and tons of impacts, and so it gets loaded up, and the two things die very close to each other.
Right.
And their dating is like, well, this one's way older than this one.
Right. The first one died, they think it's like 10,000 years old. The second one that died, they think it's very young. Right. Yeah. Even though they died right next to each other. So that's the thing. It doesn't really work. Okay. I mean, and some people will say, well, we're only working in this period of 100,000 years. That isn't that big of a deal. But it is a big deal when you're talking about people and civilizations.
Yeah, when you're trying to...
Just having it off 10 years can be really important if you're trying to figure out who was doing what where with the civilization,
Right.
I mean, like, this is... So when they're digging around ancient walls that have massive blocks or whatever, and they're trying to dig underneath the blocks and get some piece of organic material from beneath it so that they could say, well, this block was set down, this organic thing was trapped beneath it, and so we can date that thing and kind of get an idea of when this block was put here. Does that really work? I mean, not really. I mean, it's accepted science right now, but it's accepted, but people also know that it's iffy. But any textbook you read will treat it as like gospel. So that's the problem with carbon dating. Now, there's another type of dating called beryllium-10. Okay. Beryllium-10 has been recently used to date. So it's a whole cosmogenic thing again. It's generated by cosmic rays coming in. But this type of material will end up embedded in various types of sedimentary and metamorphic and not igneous, but the abyssal stone like granite. Okay.
Of course, the one I pick is not igneous.
Right, it's not igneous. It may be. I'm not sure. I know it's abyssal, and I know it's granite and limestone and stuff like that. So basically, the way this works is, if you've gone to a mountain and you started cutting rock out of it, like out of a quarry, then as soon as you expose that rock face that has not been exposed for a long time because it's been inside the mountain, so you cut it and now it's exposed, beryllium-10 begins to be embedded in it. Yeah. So you can sort of date how long it's been since that face was exposed. Yeah. There's another type of dating that does the same thing that is called, I can't remember the name of it, but it has to do with light. So you can, there's certain types of tiny like damage to the crystal in rock that's caused by by light particles. It's not patina. It's actually, you have to use an electron microscope or like some very powerful microscope to look at the tiny little crystals and you'll see these little scars in them that is caused by being exposed to direct sunlight. Wow. Okay, like a really fast particle goes burning through the crystal and like actually cuts a trough through it, and you can see that with it. Okay, so that you can see how long it's been exposed and how deep those go also. So like you expose it and those scars begin to sort of get deeper and deeper into the rock, so they can kind of count them or whatever. Anyway, those two things are used sometimes to date stone, but beryllium-10 has a minimum dating time of 10 million years. So like, I mean, you're already way past any kind of like conventional idea of dating human worked stuff. So geologists can use this to say, well, this cliff face was exposed 20 million years ago, but you're not going to be able to use it on Sacsayhuama. Ain't no Sacsayhuama going to be getting on beryllium-10.
I'll tell you what, Sacsayhuama is young.
Too young for that beryllium. So, so that's my problem with those types of dating. Now, if you go into geological dating, there's a lot of interesting ways to date it, like the diatoms, which I find fascinating. Yeah. But again, like you have to say, well, how do they know how old these diatom species are? Because basically,
it's through context, right?
Yeah, diatoms are little like single-celled creatures that build these fantastic silicon shells around themselves. So they make themselves into little gems.
There's tons of pictures of diatoms on Google. They're fascinating and
just
beautiful.
Look up diatoms on Google, and every single one of them builds a very unique crystal shield spaceship for itself to go around in.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of you have ever used diatomaceous earth to like kill some insects around your house, but it's like this white powder that's basically a bunch of these shattered shells, and they're ridiculously sharp.
It's the remnant shells of diatoms, and the crystals are so sharp that it like will kill bugs just by cutting them up, cut up their exoskeletons. So anyway, diatoms are very recognizable. Like here's the purple square guy, right? And the purple square guy we know has like he lives today. And he has been around for the past 200 years.
What about the white giblet with the spikies?
The white giblet with the spikies died out 1,500 years ago, but he was alive for 2 million years before that. Right?
So this white giblet is taking a bite out of the purple square guy.
There should be no white giblets left. So that's diatoms are interesting in that way that they're all unique. Like the ones of the same species are exactly the same, but each individual species is totally unique from all the others in the way that they build their shells.
Right.
So it's easy to sort of see, like you can go anywhere and get a collection of earth, of sand or soil or whatever, and put it under a microscope and find diatoms in it, right? And this is how a lot of people, some people who specialize in this can date that soil level or that strata based on the diatoms that are in it. But I always wonder, like, how do you know when the diatoms were, how do you know how old the diatoms are?
I didn't do any research on this, but I assumed based on one... I was reading some archaeological thing where they were using the diatoms in a riverbed to do the dating, and I was assuming that they did it by context through known geological occurrences.
It's possible because the other problem I have with geological dating is the strata dating, and the strata dating is all assumptions based on strata counting and uniformitarianism. Yeah, which is a long word that basically means everything happens all really slowly. It's the idea of uniformitarianism, what's the tenet? It's like one drop of water, one grain of sand at a time.
Yeah.
And also no forces in the past that we do not see at work today, right?
Yeah, no, processes. No processes that we cannot observe happening today. Okay, that's not the way they put it.
Right. Basically what they're saying is if we don't see it happening today, then you can't assume that it happened in the past.
Right.
Which is... it's crap. Like that's a terrible way to, but that was that for a long time for the previous to maybe 20 or 30 years ago, for the previous 150 years before that was the method for geology. And like this is why this is how they ended up getting billions of years for the age of the earth, because they would count strata and they would say, so based on the way we see soil and stuff being laid down now, how long would this layer take to build? And you would estimate, well, that would take 100,000, 150,000 years. So they would start counting the strata like that, and you're getting lower and lower, and you're in the millions, tens of millions, 100 million, 30, 300 million, 400 million, or whatever. That's how they get the ages of stuff. But it's based on, here's another one of our terms, stacks of assumptions.
Yeah.
Right? You've just got a whole huge stack of assumptions. Yeah, giant stack of assumptions, and like the very top thing is your declaration. And it's based on all these assumptions beneath it, and none of those assumptions are being checked.
So that's really interesting. Are there any other, say, archaeological dating methods that...
Context, like you were talking about. So like they'll date things by context, which is terrible because...
Stacks of assumptions.
Right. It's basically, yeah. So like they see this pot shard, right? And they assume that they know what that pot shard comes from, or they'll look at it and they'll say, okay, so it was done using a kiln, which means that it has to be from this date because we know that previous to that nobody had any kilns, right? Okay, so it's all, dude, it's terrible. Like the other thing in uniformitarianism is it bleeds over into archaeology in the form of linear development.
Right.
Okay. And so we have this, even though it's easily disproven, you could say, look at Rome fell.
Right.
After Rome fell, like there was a dark, and people were like, well, China was doing great. Yeah, well, but the point is there's ups and downs. There isn't a linear development anywhere, and you can't point to an overall global linear development either. So, And anyway, like our past 200 years, like is hockey stick like in terms of development, you know.
Right.
So it's not linear. It's like you can see that it goes up and down, and if people are right about climate change, or if a giant comet comes and destroys us, which is totally possible, then we'll drop way back down to almost nothing. So
yeah, so that's one of the main reasons why we ask all these questions about how do we know what we know,
right,
and what happened in the past, or what could have happened, and if we don't use stacks of assumptions, and if we really
or if we turn the assumptions back into questions,
yeah. then it starts to look like, man, maybe we should. You start paying attention to some other things, and
right.
think about.
I can give an
future
excellent example of the consequences of things like linear development and uniformitarianism. I'm sure everybody's familiar with ancient aliens, and we're probably running close on time here, but I'll get this out.
So we're all right.
Most people everybody's familiar with ancient aliens, and the concept basically, ancient alien theorists, so that these people have theorized this theory that like that some point in humans past, some other extraterrestrial being showed up and gave us some help. We're like, hey, here's how you like do stuff, okay? Archaeologists hate it. Like they're like, oh my god, that's so stupid. It's ridiculous. Why do they hate it? Because it doesn't fit their theories or whatever. They were like, well, these people did this. But the point is that the reason that theory came about is because most normal people look at some of these extremely advanced buildings from these extremely ancient times, and their entire education tells them about linear development, and humans were not capable of doing that at that time. So they are like, well, they must have had help.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great point.
So the whole concept of like the paleo contact ancient alien theory comes about because of archaeologists insisting that they know what the technological development was of a culture before they even look at what they did. Right. In other words, they
assume butt flaps before they even look at the structures.
So when you're going to look at a pyramid, they based on what time they think the pyramid was built, they pre-assume the level of development of that culture before they even look at the structure. So when you begin to find that the structure is like incredibly advanced, and you're telling me these people didn't even
have the wheel. It's all coincidence.
Right, these people didn't have the wheel, they didn't know about pi, they didn't have, and I mean pi in the mathematical sense, I'm sure they knew about...
They knew about cake.
That's right. Cake is a lie. Anyway, so that's why you get that. Because people are looking at the pyramid, they're like, okay, this is not possible for somebody who didn't have iron and didn't have any math, so it must be aliens. And the archaeologist is like, oh my God, you're dumb. And I'm like, no, you're dumb, dude. They think that because of you.
That's really great. Well, we're going to take a quick break here, and we'll come back and... continue on this conversation. This is very...
I was on a roll. Damn it.
Yeah. Well, hey, you want to keep rolling, bro?
No,
just roll.
I need a break.
I can cut this later.
Nope. Check, please.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Snakebros. Welcome back to Brothers of the Serpent, where we were talking about cosmic rays and the archaeological dating game. And one of the best methods is to dig up that skeleton and take it to lunch.
Dating mummies.
Anyway, Russ was talking...
What'd you do with that mummy? Well, it's a little dry.
Gross. Russ was talking in the last segment about various types of dating. And we were going to make a few more points about that, talk about another one. So go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, so there is a kind of dating that I do think is accurate, and it's called uranium, thorium, helium dating. So basically, this works on the same principle of radioactive decay, but it's uranium. So there's plenty of uranium here. It doesn't need to be generated by cosmic rays. So basically, this one isn't cosmogenically generated, so we're not basing this on the number of cosmic rays impacting the atmosphere. There's just uranium spread out ubiquitously in all rock everywhere on the planet. Okay, so you can look at certain types of crystals in rock. I think this one is agate, but you look at the crystal and the uranium decay will throw off a heavy, radioactive particle, a neutron, and it will, burn through the through the crystal and make a scar in it that you can see with specific types of microscopes, and I think they use it's really complicated. They put it in a gas chamber and they hit it with a laser and a bunch of other stuff. You have to have a physicist to do it, and he has to be a really good one. And it will be machinery that he built himself, basically, to do it. Okay, so this is why they don't use it, because physicists don't care if you don't like the dates that they give you. And their dates are going to be as accurate as they can get them based on the physics, not on your idea of when this culture was.
Yeah, they don't care about what you think about culture and contextual dating. They're just like, nah, yeah, but this is the date.
Right.
So.
And the methods I used are based on very accepted scientific principles of physics, so get the hell out of here.
Yeah. And taking that physicist on a date is not going to help his dating method either.
No, it's not.
You were going to make another point about the calibrating of carbon-14 dating.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So most of the time now, if you see a carbon-14 date given in any text or whatever, they'll give you the error plus or minus so many years, but then they'll tell you that it's calibrated, right? So it'll be the carbon-14 date. It's dated to this time plus or minus this many years. CA calibrated. The calibration basically means that as they continue to find out information about the environment of the time, in other words, anything that may affect the number of cosmic rays, how much C14 was in the environment, they add that to the calibration. But it's like anything else, you never know if you have it all, so the data is never going to be accurate. So, and even then, they're not looking at space. You can't. There's nothing on Earth that's going to tell us about space weather of the past, right? You might be able to find evidence of whether the sun was flaring here or not, whether it was, so where you could say maybe it was blocking more cosmic rays than it was before, but you're not going to know about supernovas unless they were recorded by ancient astronomers, and even then, maybe they didn't get them all, or if you're looking at really old dates when no one was astronomers, Anyway, the point is that space weather is not something you can tell by Earth evidence.
So
they're never going to know.
So can you give me an example of where you think, in your opinion, carbon dating is good and useful, or do you just distrust it? Like, what is the level of,
I would say
opinion, like its usefulness?
Okay, it's useful in terms of giving you a general idea, but the problem is that we're always using it to date things that have to do with human development, with human cultures and stuff, because it doesn't really go back that far, 60 to 100,000 years. So if I date something and if I date a piece of pottery and I get a date of 90,000 years plus or minus 1,200 years, well, that gives me a sort of a ballpark, but that doesn't tell me whether this piece of pottery was made by a culture that lived in this place 1,000 years before or after some other one, because I've got an error of 1,200 years there. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So it doesn't really work for building a very detailed story of human history, because there's too much error. There's too much, and another problem is that there's a lot of different methods. I'm not going to go into this really in detail, but there's a lot of different methods for doing C14 dating. There's, and there's a lot of ways to really mess it up. Like, you can contaminate the and this bothers me, because they're like, oh, the specimen was contaminated. I'm like, well, if it's that easy to contaminate, it was just sitting out there in the open for 10,000 years. I mean,
yeah.
What is contamination here? So
that's a good point. Yeah.
And when they talk about, so we found this piece of organic matter, like a piece of wood, say there's a tiny little sliver of wood that they found, that they're going to use that to date, because that piece of wood was underneath a giant block or it was smashed between two giant blocks in some ancient structure. They're assuming that piece of wood, number one, died shortly before it was laid down on that piece of block. It could be a very old piece of wood at the time of the building.
Yeah.
They don't know. I'm just saying, there's just too many problems with this. I mean, and if it was a piece of driftwood and it was in the ocean, then the salt would leach out all that carbon. Not the salt. I'm sorry. The little marine creatures that need the carbon to build their little shells, they're going to get it all out of there. I mean, so yeah.
But there could also be a lot of creatures living in the piece of wood
that are continuing the carbon cycle.
Continuing the carbon cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the piece of wood, seriously, there's olive trees right now that are like 2,000 years old in the Mediterranean.
Right.
And a lot of the wood on the olive trees, the trunks are massive. They're as big around as a car. And a lot of the wood on them is just dead.
Right.
And who knows how long that wood has been dead.
Right.
But you could go and cut down that tree and get a piece of the dead wood off of the trunk and make some carving out of it.
Yeah.
And your culture is like 2,000 years older than that piece of dead wood that has been preserved by the life of the tree. And of course,
right.
Insects
They'll date that thing. They'll date your culture based on that piece of wood and think you're only 800 years old.
Right.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of problems with it. I don't think it's something we should completely throw out because it does give us ballparks, right?
Yeah.
But
you're talking about
I almost 100% completely disagree with using it to date structures. You cannot carbon date stone, and the only way that they can really try to get structure dates with carbon dating is by trying to find some associated piece of organic material that's jammed underneath, or in some places they say, well, if it's here, it must have been there. In other words, no one could have gotten it there after the structure was built.
Right, but they got it out.
Right. I mean, the assumptions are just too... Like, what if somebody completely dismantled the structure to do some repairs and they put it all back together? Which could be very well the case in a lot of Egyptian stuff where the structures were repurposed multiple times by many different pharaohs.
Right. So really their best bet is finding the latest thing.
That's right.
Underneath the structure when that doesn't tell you who built it.
Right. I would almost... This is my go-to thing. I assume... Not assume really, but my sort of first inclination is to think that whatever dates they're getting from carbon-14 dating of organic stuff around structures is going to be from the most recent usage of that structure by some ancient culture. Not the original building of it or whatever, but the most recent. Because there's this concept called intrusive usage, right? Or intrusive burials is usually what they say, but... So in the Andes down south in South America, you have this thing where there are obviously, and I mean that the Inca and the Aztecs told the Spaniards, the Europeans this when they came there, that when the Europeans are like, okay, whoa, did you guys build that up there? And they were like, no, that was the giants or that was the gods or whatever, right? So they straight up told them that they didn't build it, but they had been using it, right? And you could tell that they had sort of built onto some places or whatever, but you can easily see the difference in the stonework. You got giant, massive,
but the archaeologists are like, pish posh, you built this.
That's right. And they'll get mad at us, at alternative people in archaeology for saying no, some more ancient, advanced culture that was not the Aztecs or the Inca built this structure, and they will call us racists, trying to say that we are, belittling their abilities or whatever. I'm like, no, I'm actually believing what they said. You're calling them liars.
Yeah.
I'm not. They said we didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen. So, hey, I'm just believing them.
Hey,
what?
Hey, whoa.
What?
Careful.
Oh, okay. What difference at this point does it make? All right, so that's the quick rough lowdown on the dating stuff. Just stay away from those mummies.
Yep.
Lots of cocaine mummies there.
Don't date ancient chicks.
That's right. Especially ones that blow.
Yeah.
You know about the cocaine mummies, right?
No.
So the German archaeology team got permission from Egyptian authorities to date almost 100. There was almost 100 non-royal, sort of just they were wealthy citizens or whatever, merchants and bureaucrats and mummies of people like that. Okay, just a whole bunch of non-royal mummies from various places in Egypt. They got permission to sort of do all these tests and dating on them, and they found tobacco and cocaine in almost all of them. And that's important because tobacco and cocaine only grow in South America. So how did ancient Egyptian mummies, get American plants?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is
first of all, the pharaoh had a giant party.
He's like, I'm inviting everyone.
He's like, lay down, bitch.
No, the first thing that comes to mind is that the climate could have been, way different.
Yeah, but it's actually the soil. I mean, like, you can't, as far as I know, and you could be right that maybe those plants were.
I'm not saying is that's
I never even thought of that. Like, I always have assumed that, like, those plants only grow here, and they've never grown anywhere else because of soil conditions. And I know that that's true, but you're right. The soil conditions could have been such that they grew in the old.
That's
world.
what those huge light bulbs they're holding are. It's the poppy plant.
The light bulbs are from when they were tweaking on coke. They're like, bing, got a big idea, guys. Let's build a giant pyramid.
Look, let's put the cord that's attached to this lotus flower and plug it into this weird little column thing that looks like
go to bed.
A magnet. And then we'll be able to see in the dark in this pyramid to carve us doing this.
But you know what was claimed, actually? A lot of people claimed that the the Germans had contaminated the samples. And people were like, contaminated them with coke and tobacco.
Yeah.
I mean, are you saying that the German archaeology students were doing, like, body shots off the mummies? Like, come on, man. Just come on. Germans are crazy, but they're not that crazy. I love you, Germans. I'm kidding.
You stole my cartouche.
You should try this cocaine. It's very good. All right, so what's the next topic? Are we done? I think we've gone through all of that. I mean, there's plenty of tangents on that I could go off onto, but I think you had some other topics you wanted to go to.
We were talking about the 411 stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's been this thing in the news that we were looking at recently about this plane. A student from, I think it's in Michigan, rented a Cessna. So it's a single prop, but you can get 4 or 5 people in it, airplane. And he was an experienced pilot or whatever. He rented this Cessna in Michigan, and he was supposed to fly to somewhere else in Michigan. And the plane crashed in Canada the next day, out of fuel. So it basically just flew on autopilot until it ran out of fuel and just kind of slowly went down and crashed in the boondocks in Canada. And when rescuers went to the site of the crash, there was no pilot and no sign of any pilot. Like, there were no footprints in the snow. So the plane was empty when it crashed. Now, the plane had an autopilot, but it's the extremely rudimentary kind of autopilot that does not take off by it. So in other words, you have to be in there. You have to manually lift the plane off the ground, get it up to cruising speed, and then you can put the autopilot on, and it'll basically keep it on course. But that's it. So he disappeared in flight.
Yeah. My first thought was like, well, he may have just, like, bailed out of the plane for whatever reason.
Right. So that's possible, but there are problems with it. Is that, like, this plane doesn't have some planes have this like a punch out door in the ceiling, like a roof. What do you call them? Like a skylight thing you can punch out, and then that's how you get out. Is you jump out this right. hole in the roof. Well, this doesn't have one of those. Okay, basically the only way you can get in and out of the plane is by opening the doors on the side, and that's really hard when the plane is at speed, which is, I think it requires at least 170 miles per hour to fly. So at minimum, you're going 170. And if you've ever tried to open a car door when you're going 70,
yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
So think of another 100 miles an hour added onto that, and I doubt that you could leap out of the plane.
I mean, it could have been done.
Yeah.
I think it's possible that it could have been done, but it would have been very difficult, especially, like, to leave no evidence of that.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's just very strange. He was a PhD student in information theory. He never had any suicidal tendencies. It's just one of those deals where it's like the guy disappears and there does not appear to be any logical reason. He was just not, he didn't have any problems in his life that anybody knows of. He didn't have any financial troubles. He was doing great in school. He was, he seemed to have everything to live for. His family was just and that's the other thing. I'm like, if you're going to commit suicide, there are easier ways that don't possibly incur the cost of a Cessna aircraft onto your family. You know what I'm saying? So like I don't know. So anyway, that talking about that and this almost, not impossible, but really improbable type of disappearance reminded me of one in what's known as the Bennington Triangle, which is basically a Vermont, New York sort of area. They call it the Triangle because of the Bermuda Triangle. Everything's got to be a triangle. But basically, there's this area, and I actually lived in this area in Vermont for a year without knowing it at the time. But the Bennington area, a lot of strange disappearances there. Mostly people walking on nature trails. But one that's always stuck in my head is a guy. He was in his 40s or 50s, I think, and he was getting onto a bus. He was riding a passenger bus, like a Greyhound, and it was a night trip. So that, it was a bunch of people getting on the bus, and they were all taking it from upper New York State into Vermont. And it was a drive of several hours, and there were no stops. It was a continuous. They were going from wherever so everybody gets on the bus, including this guy. He gets his own set. No one sits next to him. He's got his own set of seats on the right side of the aisle. And he put his bag or whatever there with him, and and people said they remember him just kind of leaning back and going to sleep. Well, when they got to their destination, and they had not stopped on the way, that dude was not on the bus, but all of his bags were still in the seat.
Yeah, that is just really weird. Like when I hear stuff like that, my brain immediately goes into like how could he have done it?
Right? How did he sneak off that bus?
Yeah, he I don't know.
And it's just
maybe he saw the movie Speed and he was like, I'm gonna go out and ride under the bus for a little while.
Yeah, but and that's the thing is no one remembers seeing him get up or anything. They're like he went to sleep, and then just when they got there, he was not there. So now, obviously, probably a lot of other people were napping and stuff. It was in the middle of the night, so it's conceivable that he ninja'd down the aisle of the bus and maybe got out the emergency door without the driver noticing, which is really doubtful because that turns all the lights on.
The alarm.
Or and how did he get out? He couldn't have gotten out the bus regular doors because that's right next to the driver, and the driver definitely wouldn't notice because you have to reach over and yank the lever to open that door that is right next to the driver. I have heard people try to say that he did something in the bathroom, but what did he get into there's just no way off the bus.
Yeah. That's just really weird. And I've never read the 411 books by David Paulides.
Right. So that's the next step. Was the Cessna thing reminded me of the bus story, which gets into the entire 411 topic.
Right, which we've talked about quite a bit, but like I said,
not on the show. Yeah,
I haven't read the books, but Russ has told me a whole bunch of the stories, and they're all very, very strange. And we've listened to some interviews with David Paulides, and it's pretty fascinating. This guy is basically making a case book or whatever.
Yeah, he's built a profile,
a profile, like a criminal profile.
Right. So if you're investigating, if you've got a bunch of murders that you haven't been able to solve, and then you start to notice that they have weird similarities, like there's always a red business card on the, or just a plain piece of red, something like that, something strange that's similar in all these cases. That's what he's doing. That's how you put together a profile of a serial killer, right?
Right.
So a serial killer will have little signature things that he does, and then you'll start to see, well, wow, look at over here in L.A. There's another killing with that same signature stuff, and you start to see these, and this is how people catch serial killers. They build a profile of them. Paulides has done the same thing with missing persons cases, starting in
unsolved missing persons cases.
Right, they're unsolved, or even if they're solved, quote unquote solved, in that they found the person or they found fragments of their body or whatever. There's still a massive mystery about what happened on all of these cases. So.
Right, a child in the mountains goes missing and they don't have any shoes and they're found 25 miles away or something like that.
Within 19 hours over multiple mountains and crossing fences and rivers and children found in impossible places.
So they're found, but there's no explanation for how they could have done.
Right, and if they're alive, they have very strange things to say or nothing at all to say. They don't remember anything at all. Or they tell you very strange stories about shining robots or bears that gave them food and stuff. It's very weird. Or little girls that helped them climb the hills at night that turned out to have also gone missing in that same area, but 2 decades before that. Super creepy. That one's you tell that one at the campfire, man. Everyone was like, "Oh my god, yeah, she went missing 2 decades before."
So David Paulides did this thing where he, like Russ was saying, he basically made like a
case profile,
case profile connecting all the similarities between all of these mysterious things.
And the profile is based on like what you would normally do, crime scene profile stuff. Like, what are the circumstances in terms of the scene? So, like, where do they go missing, or what are they doing when they go? So boulder fields, berry picking, or in terms of the missing search, like sometimes if the body is found in a place that's been previously searched multiple times, he considers that part of the profile, right?
Right.
Very small children is part of the profile automatically, because like when a 2-year-old goes missing in the middle of nowhere, like just vanishes. That's not, and there's no sign of animal attack or anything, right? So in my case, I was more interested in the idea of what is doing this, okay? Because, and if you listen to Paulides, when people are always asking him, well, what do you think is doing, like, is it Bigfoot, right? Is it aliens? Is it like super secret government, super soldiers? What he says is, all my data has been able to determine is what it isn't, and it's not a human or any series of humans, because the circumstance,
at least not with known technology,
right? It isn't any kind of known human perpetrator, because like it's not. People have said like, oh well, there are serial killers that like living in the parks. Well, there was one case of that at one point, and like one serial killer who was known to have taken victims in one of the national parks somewhere, but. The problem with that is this is like he got cases from like the late 1700s up to now, so that kind of I don't think there's any serial killers that old.
It's long game,
and it's not a Sith deal where he's got an apprentice and he passes it down, and the apprentice, So it's not that, and also it's global in scope. So like no jet setting, extremely long lived serial killers with apprentices. So whatever it is, he basically says is like whatever it is. It doesn't seem to be a human perpetrator or any known animal or anything like that. Right? So I was interested in that. So, and when you read the cases, the impossibility of some of these disappearances is intriguing. So my list was of the attributes or abilities that the perpetrator must have in order to accomplish all these disappearances. So here's the list. It must be uninhibited by terrain, no matter how rugged. Uninhibited by rivers, lakes, swamps, mud, muck. Uninhibited by inclement weather of any kind or strength. So no matter like strongest snowstorms, it doesn't matter. Uninhibited by darkness. Uninhibited by extremes of heat, cold, or altitude. Uninhibited by debilitating flora defenses like cactus spines, thorns, nettles, etc. Capable of approaching to within arm's reach of people while remaining completely concealed and undetected. Capable of completely overwhelming even the largest, most physically fit adults in seconds without making a sound or allowing the victim to make a sound. Capable of abducting full-grown adults completely silently such that people only a few meters away neither hear nor see anything. Uninhibited by weight of the person being abducted. Leaves almost no scent that search and rescue dogs can track, and additionally can apparently mask the scent of an abducted human. Able to conceal heat signatures from forward-looking infrared radar cams. Able to induce altered state and memory loss in human victims. Able to self-conceal completely even in open environments that are lacking any kind of cover at all. Able to abduct hundreds or possibly thousands of people each year for the past 200 years or more without humans becoming aware that anything is happening. Able to affect domesticated dogs in some way that is not clear, perhaps to use them as a lure. Able to move about with impunity even amongst hundreds of search and rescue, National Park Service, law enforcement officers, FBI, and security, and place a victim's body in places searched many times. That's just a short list. I mean, like, I what I really want to do to flesh the list out is go back through the books that I read and, like, read each case and add attributes as I see them in the case, and because
that was all just from memory.
That's just from memory, yeah. Like, so if I went by case, I could make the list really long, because there are some where you're just like, how the hell?
Yeah, that is really cool.
So you can hear that list and you're like, okay, so that's not a person. I mean, I can't even see how that, like, how does advanced technology help you do that some of that stuff? I mean, like, unless you've got like perfect cloaking, and then you're a hypnotist, and you're, and then you're like super strong because you can carry the guy. I mean, I don't know. I just don't. I don't know. It doesn't seem like tech could really help a person do this, unless I mean maybe this is why a lot of people just go straight to aliens, because it seems like you need a large machine to do all this stuff for you. If you're in a flying saucer that could beam people up.
Well, let's talk about aliens for a minute.
All right. They real.
They real. They out there. Shout out to y'all aliens, But there's one thing in particular that I can't remember who was saying this or what, but it was about the age of the universe. The approximate age of the universe, and the approximate number of planetary systems that have a planet that is in the habitable zone.
Yeah, it's a form you're talking about.
There's like this formula where they figure out the probability of life being developed, and like we think of ourselves here on this planet as our planet's this old or whatever.
I think it's called Fermi's paradox.
Okay.
Fermi's paradox. It basically is like it's a long formula that it has a bunch of variables that mean like they basically mean like number of estimated planets or stars in the universe, number of stars that have planets, number of planets on each individual star, number of stars that will have planets that are in the habitable zone, number of those that will have the conditions all correct for life, number of those that will actually develop life, number of those that will actually develop intelligent life, number of those that will have intelligent life that will live long enough to make a civilization, so on and so forth.
Right.
And you still end up with there should be hundreds of billions of intelligent, advanced civilizations all over the universe. And so Fermi's paradox is...
many of them far older than
right,
ours.
so Fermi's paradox is, where is everybody? That's Fermi's paradox.
Wow, that is... So we've talked about like the possibility that we, with the human race, has been shielded from contact with these things, or open contact, and one of the ways that we arrive at that is by looking at ancient texts that talk about visitors from the heavens and how they deal with us. And like just the plainest example is that we were created by beings that came down from the heavens, and in the story of the Anunnaki and the Adamu, we were created as workers.
Right.
And some of the Anunnaki looked at the human race as slaves, and they did not want us to become like them. And only a very few select humans were allowed to ascend or be taken into the heavens.
Adapa, yeah.
So it looks like if you're thinking about just space and aliens and all that, you could say that from those stories we can see that these aliens don't want the human race to achieve space flight. They don't want the human race to become part of the larger community.
If there is one, yeah.
If there is one out there, and so that we're like property.
Yeah.
And other species or alien species of intelligent life or whatever are not allowed to come here and mingle with us or give us knowledge or help us advance at all.
So they're interdicted in some way. They're kept from being here, or sometimes maybe some of them slip through, but they're like the equivalent of the teenagers out for a midnight drive into the quarry or something like that. Right. It's like
and there's this thing about the Watchers. The Watchers are this group that is basically charged with watching us. For what reason? Not sure.
I mean, like, can you come up with a more creepy name for a set of alien beings, like the Watchers? What's really creepy about that? Whenever somebody mentions the Watchers,
they're watching Us Tube.
Some of the Us Tube. So, some of the oldest statuettes or sculptures ever found are called eye statues. And I mean, like I look at them and I'm like, the Watchers. They're like little weird figurines, but their signatures, they've got these gigantic eyes.
Apples.
Eyes.
With a bite taken out of it. Eye statues. I was just like, man, that was...
Oh my God. I completely missed that one. Eye statues.
Okay, that was dumb.
No, that was great. I'm dumb for missing that completely. Eye statues.
Some of the oldest statues we know
That's right.
are called
Most advanced
eye statues.
Eye statues. First of its kind. White with a single button that says on.
The eye statue 7+.
Yeah, so you can look them up. They're very creepy looking because they have no facial features. They just have these two gigantic eyes. And I always think of the Watchers when I see them. And when you think of this in context of like these were the earliest, so like the most ancient humans that we know of that were making sculptures, this is what they made first. These statues with these huge eyeballs and nothing else for a face, you know. It's just like I'm like,
oh yeah, I'm looking at one right now.
yeah, those are incredibly creepy.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's actually not those, but those are similar. Let's see.
Oh man, that's not an eye statue.
No, it's not. But they're similar.
You know, it's a Chinese knockoff.
That dude is just high on opium.
No, it's a Sumerian alien.
He's like, whoa, man.
This is a Sumerian statue with big eyes. Anyway,
what are they? I don't see any. There they are. That is what they look like, dude.
Athenian owls. That's what they call it.
Those are owls?
No one knows, really. Come on.
Who would think that was an owl?
I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, so you can look them up. They're crude, okay? So these are very ancient. They're pre-Sumerian, pre-civilization or whatever, but they're found in the same area, the Ubaid place where they found the snake sculptures and stuff. But these are older than that. And some of them are in Japan. Like if you look up the Jotun, I think they're called the Jotun culture or whatever. They made eye statues as well. So you have them in Sumer and in Japan. So these ancient peoples all over the world started making these statues with giant eyeballs. Yeah, kind of at the same time. And you're reading about the Watchers and you're just like,
dude, thinking about that makes me reminds me of the paintings. The Native American petroglyphs on the rock walls in Utah, in and around Moab.
Yeah, let's talk. Go ahead and tell about those because that was wild,
dude. They're one of the creepiest ones. Is just a group of. They look like sort of like people, but they're just wearing cloaks. They don't have legs or whatever. Their bodies are sort of tapered.
Shadow silhouette tapers.
Yeah, dark silhouettes. They taper from the feet. And there's not really feet. It's just this tapering thing gets wider to the shoulders, and then they have these just dark heads. They just look like hooded, cloaked ghosts.
Yeah, because they kind of fade out at the bottom too.
And some of them are like you're just looking at a flat wall, and these are just flat, just little 2D paintings on the wall. But it looks like a bunch of them are standing, and some of them are further back because they're a little smaller. But the perspective is just right. And then there's this one that's just
huge and
he's
crazy.
Massive, and he's got these crazy rings around his head, and it's just it just looks.
And none of them have any features. They're just these silhouette shapes.
Yeah, to me, it just makes me think that whoever painted that witnessed someone, like some alien race coming down and just all coming towards him. It's just like, oh my God, like what inspired that?
Yeah.
But there's a whole bunch of.
For some reason, it made me think
just
of
crazy
the Plato's Cave thing too. Like now, I'm thinking of shadows on the wall.
What's the Plato's Cave thing?
The Plato's Cave myth that where like it was his illustration of like everyone were living in illusion, right? And you can't wake people up; they have to do it themselves. So you've got everybody is like they're in this cave, and they're looking at the back of the cave wall, right? And their entire world is there's shadows on the wall of that cave, and it's the shadows are theirs. Right, but all of their interactions happen through the shadows and everything. And I'm probably butchering this because I haven't read it in a long time. But the idea is that one guy, discovers by looking behind him that what's causing the shadows on the wall is the freaking sunrise coming through the cave entrance, and that there's this whole world out there of green, beautiful stuff, and this all in the sun and everything. And like he tries to start these shadows are just a pale. Come on, and they kill him. They don't want to know that shit. They're in their world with the shadows.
Yes.
Right. So that's Plato's Cave that's probably a terrible. I need to probably look at it again before. That's basically the idea. Is you've got people interacting with something that is, an illusion of reality caused by the actual reality that's behind them that they've never seen.
Yeah, man. I'm probably still in that state, but looking back, like I recall being in that state in other ways.
You're like swan,
Yeah,
dog.
like just I don't know, thinking about the world in terms of how we understand it, or human understanding at this point, like believing that we know all of the things that we know. Like Feynman had this great way to describe this thing, and it was basically about knowing the difference between the name of something and knowing something.
Right.
And in that, he describes this little story about when he was a child, and his dad taught him to notice things. And so one day he's like playing with his wagon, and he's got a ball in the wagon. And he noticed that when he pulled the wagon, the ball would rush to the back of the wagon. And when he'd stop the wagon, the ball would then rush to the front of the wagon. So he went to his dad and he told his dad, like, hey, I noticed this thing. And he explains it. And his dad says that is, he explains that this is what's happening. And he says, why? And his dad answers, that no one knows.
Right. He says that, the ball has inertia, right?
Yeah, he says the general principle is that things that are moving want to keep on moving.
And things that aren't moving want to keep on not moving.
Right. And things that are not moving don't want to move unless you push on them hard.
Right.
And that principle is called inertia, but no one knows why it's true.
Right.
And so he explains that his father, even though he wasn't a physicist and he wasn't educated, knew the difference between knowing something and knowing the name of something. Mm-hmm. And I learned that basically Feynman. Just listening to that, I was just like, oh my God, like we call this, for example, electricity. And it's like that we call it electricity, that we've given it a name, or that we call this thing inertia,
and that we can manipulate it in some ways.
Right. Gives you sort of the impression, or you take for granted that we know what it is, but we don't. We don't know what inertia is. We don't know what electricity is.
Right.
We don't really know what light is.
Right.
So when I realized all of that stuff, it was like turning around.
That's right.
And no longer looking at the shadows on the walls, thinking I knew what was going on.
Right. And
it opens up a whole world of possibilities that I thought, were impossible. Like I had described how I had all these magnets. I liked to collect magnets when I was a kid, and I always thought, like, man, if I could just, take these little ramagons or whatever and put these magnets on them and put this on this pivot and make this magnet swing around and
I
was trying to make perpetual motion. I didn't know.
Don't you know that's impossible?
I didn't know there was a term called perpetual motion, but I was working on this thing trying to make it happen. And I remember
17th century Victorian where the salt would pay any attention to you making perpetual motion machines.
Somebody was asking me what I was doing. I don't know who it was, but I told them what I was attempting to do. Yeah, I was trying to set this up to where it would just keep on going. Yeah. And they go, oh, well, perpetual motion is impossible. And I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, you're talking about a perpetual motion machine, and it's impossible. And I was just like, oh. And I just like put away the magnets.
Yeah.
And never played with them again.
Same thing happened to me, but eventually I figured out, wait a minute. I didn't expect it to run forever.
Yeah.
Like, forever, ever, ever.
Right.
I mean, like...
just until the next cataclysm.
Yeah. I mean... not even until the sun burned out. Just if it just kept going until I died, that would be good enough forever for me.
Yeah.
Perpetual motion is impossible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So something that will run until after the end of the universe is impossible.
Yeah. So that's just like on another tangent.
Yeah.
That type of knowing, quote unquote, is it kills the spirit, you lose curiosity.
Drive,
like after that point, I was just like, the magnets are in a little drawer, and I don't mess with them anymore because what I want to do with them is impossible.
Right.
And so there's no more mystery in it. Where I was just
get this inkling of like, wow, with these things, I think that I could make this thing and then somebody's like, nope, that's impossible, and you're like, oh. And then you don't want to play with them anymore because those things can't do that thing you wanted to do with them. So you don't want to do anything with them.
And like 20 years later, I realized that like they don't even know what magnetism is.
I'm down here like, hey man, magnets.
How do they work? So I got on the internet and bought a bunch of magnets and started messing with them and drawing diagrams now and like coming up with different ideas and
traveling through time.
But it's cool. Like I haven't created perpetual motion, but I've learned so much stuff from actually going back and just re-looking at these things that I was told and believed that I knew what it was all about and all that stuff. And so taking another look with these eyes, now that I realize that we don't really know what this stuff is it's a great thing.
Yeah, it's very refreshing.
Very refreshing.
I think we're running up on time here. Where are we at? I can't see the numbers.
Oh yeah, we're way over the clock.
Way over the clock.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more craziness later.
Snakebros.
And welcome back to Snakebros, Brothers of the Serpent, where we are about to discuss some impossibilities and impossiblocks.
Snakebros.
Impossiblocks is another term, by the way, that we use to just basically when we're talking about massive stone blocks that are kind of impossible to move, bros. Impossiblocks, you'll hear it often. So I have this habit of finding little bits of news or information. I have a weird news feed that I read or whatever, and every once in a while I find something in there or a story somewhere or whatever that I'm just like, okay, that is not possible.
And yet it happened.
And yet here we are with it happening. And I'll spend the next couple of weeks showing this thing to everybody. I'm like, look at this. How the fuck? This is not. And people are like, oh,
maybe.
What is that? I'm like, look at this block. Look at that dude. Oh yeah. Were they moving it? Yeah, they were dragging it across mountains. Wow. Anyway, so I'll chew on these stories for weeks, and what fascinates me about them really is to dig into and really get all of the impossible details out of it. Because like when you read the stories about them, about the block or about whatever impossible thing happened, the story inevitably glosses over all of that because most people they shy away from impossible things. So when you read the news story about some impossible thing that happened, you inevitably discover that there are large gaps, right? Where if the person was really interested in the impossibility of this thing happening, they would explain to you every impossible detail about, and so that's what I like to do with these stories when I chew on them. I'm like, I want to dig out every little thing in there that I'm like, okay, and then this can't happen either, and then this is totally impossible, right? So the one I've been chewing on lately is about something known as the Devil's Footprints, and it comes from Italy. Basically, there's an old volcano in northern Italy, and the locals have known about this for a long, long time. But on the side of the mountain, coming down the side of the mountain from the top, are a set of deep footprints in rock that was once a pyroclastic flow that was part of a volcanic eruption. So I'll get into some of that later. But the point is that they don't look like you can't see toes and heel or whatever. They're just like they're deep, like think of walking through deep mud, right?
In boots,
right? You leave these kind of holes in the in the material, right? And as you pull the foot out, it distorts it and stuff. So that's what they look like. And they're human-sized bipedal, whatever it was bipedal, and they go all the way down the mountain, walking on top of this pyroclastic flow when it was soft, obviously. So the locals have called it the devil's footprints because they're like, well, people can't walk on lava, and this is walking down the mountain. So obviously Satan came out of the volcano and walked down onto Earth, right? So, Satan. And I'm just like, well, that's flawed because Satan has cloven hooves. This dude was like a regular human footprint. So for the longest time, archaeologists...
And it wasn't Lucifer because it would have been like an S-curve.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It would have just been a snake trail. But...
snake prints.
Archaeologists have just kind of blown this off. They're just like, whatever. They're probably not really human footprints because it is possible.
What do they think it is?
Well, it is possible to get footprints of, say, some other bipedal thing like a flightless bird or whatever. Something that walks on 2 feet that makes deep footprints that it can then degrade into some. I know
what it is.
What?
I just figured it out.
What?
It was a slinky. It was.
Who was running the slinky down the volcano?
It was big volcanic slinky, and it just was blam, 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 blam. And there was, and then Satan was standing at the top of the volcano, going, "Go, go!"
Everyone loves a slinky, slinky, slinky. Everyone loves a slinky. Go, slinky, go! It's gonna be some kind of a record. All right, so the story was about the fact that archaeologists had actually decided, all right, we'll go take a look at these devil's footprints. So they went up the mountain, and when they came back down, they were like, so they really are human footprints. They dated them, and we just got over the dating stuff. But pyroclastic flows can have organic material in them, so because a pyroclastic flow picks up the forest and everything on the side of the mountain, so they can date. And they dated them to about, I think it was like 35,000 years. Okay, so we're talking about if it was a human, and they're saying that they were like when they examined the bottom of the prints down in the hole, that it was human. It was a modern human's foot. Okay, what?
I'm just thinking about this daredevil. It's just like, all right, I want to parachute in to this volcano and then run down in these kick-ass volcano boots.
But they could see the guy was wearing no shoes. I mean, he was barefoot. Okay. They could see the imprint of the toes and the heel and stuff down there at the very bottom of the prints. And they also said that it was obvious that he was carefully picking his way. He was not running. He was each step. What they said was very deliberate, right? And it would seem that would have to be the case because if you look at how deep the prints are.
But I mean, even like.
So
if you were that close to the pyroclastic flow, wouldn't it just burn you?
Right. So yeah. So let me finish getting into so they're like, okay, so he, and the footprints are clearly going down the mountain. They're not, that the toes are pointed downhill. And they said that there are even a couple places where you could see slight leftover imprints of because the mountainside was so steep that the dude had put his hands down and also, all right. So they're like, yeah. So it was clearly a person very carefully picking his way down the mountain. And I'm like. After a volcano? So let's talk about pyroclastic flows. You have a volcanic eruption, which first of all blows the top of the mountain off. Okay, a volcanic eruption generates what's called a column. Okay, the igneous column. So the force of the gas and the pumice and all the material coming out of the throat of the volcano is so great that the lava doesn't just kind of pour out and start flowing down the side of the mountain. Like some lava may do that, but that's incidental. What's really happening is that volcano is spewing a bunch of material under an extreme amount of pressure straight up. It's like a rocket engine. It's blowing it into space. So you'll see this, you look at any pictures of volcanoes going off, there's this fat, thick column of smoke going straight up from the volcano, and when it'll get up and hit some high level of air and start to spread out like a nuclear bomb explosion. It makes this big mushroom cloud. That is called the pillar is called the column, and the reason it's a column and not just it's not smoke. That thing is full of rock ash, a bunch of different heavy gases, all kinds of nasty toxic materials. It's got lava. It's got freaking things that look like meteors. They're molten boulders, and all that is being carried up in this column, and they're massive. They can weigh hundreds of millions of tons. All right, but they continue to go up because the force of the material continuing to come out of the throat of the volcano is so great that stuff doesn't fall. It just keeps getting pushed up. So it's building an actual physical column. It's not smoke. All right. The material is just going up or whatever, and eventually the volcano runs out of steam. It's like and it stops. The column then collapses back down on top of the mountain. This is what generates a pyroclastic flow. That's why pyroclastic flows are made of ash, dust, pumice, and a whole bunch of other stuff. All the trees on the side of the mountain, and it's going about 600 or 700 miles an hour and is around 1,000 degrees in temperature. Okay, this is what buried Pompeii. Okay, it was a pyroclastic flow, right? That's why you see people, you can see them laying in the streets. That they're obviously all alive, and it all happened all suddenly because this extremely hot ash and all this stuff just like came roaring down across the town at 600 or 700 miles an hour and buried it under 50 yards of stuff. Jeez. That then turns into rock. Okay. That's what a pyroclastic flow is. It is the collapse of a volcanic column. So if you think of the volcano as this sort of ramp, because the column is going up above this pointed thing. So when the column collapses, it collapses onto this cone-shaped thing and just pours down all sides of the mountain in a sort of a shock wave going 600 or 700 miles an hour. All right? It's impossible to get away from if you're... So that's what the footprints are in the material left on the mountainside after the pyroclastic flow. So somebody was on the mountain during the column collapse.
Or
because how did they get up there?
The footprints were there after the column collapsed.
Right. So, he had to walk down the mountain.
So where are his footprints going up the mountain?
Well, right. So here's the thing. They should be in the same layer of stuff if he came up the mountain after the column collapse as the footprints going down, which means that they should be there somewhere.
Yeah, unless he came to the top of the mountain from the air.
Right.
Which he would have had to travel through a bunch of smoke.
Right. So if he landed on the volcano after the pyroclastic flow and he just landed at the peak or up high or whatever and then walked down, I guess that's possible, but now that I think of it, every volcano, like most volcanoes today, have cameras on them. Like they've got scientific webcam, geological cameras, and you can watch videos of them exploding. And every video of every volcano going off that I know of, where you can watch the video on the internet, there's weird shit flying around them. People find, there's UFOs in it, whatever that means. They're just unidentified things that are flying around. And I've even seen one. There's a volcano in Mexico where a definite long beam or streak of something actually comes down out of the sky and goes into the mouth of the volcano, like goes into it, right? And people are like, oh, it was a shooting star, or it was a plane flying, or it was a bug in front of the camera. But no, because this, like any of those things would, if they left a streak, they're saying, well, the camera's it takes slow pictures, so something moving fast will leave a streak. But this thing didn't leave a streak like that, where it was like a streak here, and then the next streak was contiguous with that one. This streak went you know what I'm saying? So that it was overlapping itself in the previous images, which means it isn't something streaking past. It's a long bar. It's it's a solid piece of. It looked like a streak, but it was just a solid thing that was moving down very slowly and just buried itself into the lava of the volcano. It just like went directly into the throat. Anyway, that's a big tangent. The point is that these footprints are of a barefoot man. Okay, he was barefoot. He was walking down the side of the mountain, and let's say that somehow he was magically got up there somehow without having to walk or whatever. So he wasn't up there while the column was collapsing. Still, he was barefoot walking on material that was recently in a volcano. So
soft stone.
At least several hundred. Yeah, and since it was still soft, that meant that it hadn't hardened yet, which means, so after a pyroclastic flow goes down and it leaves material, you basically have this weird slurry sort of mud that is several hundred degrees in temperature. It's boiling, like, it's just it. And he's barefoot, and he's just kind of moseying on down, and like every footstep buries him up to the shins in boiling 400-degree clay mud. No.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And they're like, oh, he's very carefully picking his way down. What?
It's just crazy.
So that's what I mean. Like, the story just says, so the scientists went and looked at, they're like, yeah, the locals called the devil footprints because they thought he was walking in lava, but he wasn't. Turned out it was a pyroclastic flow. The scientists went and looked at it. They said, yeah, it was human footprints, and he was very carefully picking his way down the mountain. I'm like,
so wait a minute.
You skipped over all
the devil is a man? He doesn't have devil boots?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a boring devil. He's like, the devil comes out of the volcano. He's like, what a nice day. Yeah. Forgot my shoes. Whoa, almost.
Yeah, I don't even know what to do with a story like
right,
that.
so I like to think about them and just find every impossible thing. That's what fascinates me. There are so many impossible things in this story that, they're like, well, it wasn't actually lava. It was a pyroclastic flow. I'm like, that's even more impossible. I mean, yeah, it's like the idea of walking through soft lava when it was still molten. Well, people do firewalks. Have you ever? I mean,
yeah, that's what I was thinking while you're telling the story. Is
right.
Like the firewalker guys, they walk across
and
the
like a lot of
barefoot.
Most firewalker people live on volcanic islands in the Pacific. So they.
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah.
I didn't know
mean, they actually do it in fire pits with real fire, but like I assume that. And no, I don't assume this. I know this because of stories that I've read. The shamans do it walking across fresh lava fields. Like, But
still, this guy got to the top of a mountain while the flow was still...
Right.
It's just like...
And yes, it's the volcano that makes this one impossible. Like, you can't stand on a mountain, number one, during the volcanic eruption. Number two, during the collapse of the column. And like the presumption here is that he waited for the column collapse to complete, which means all of the column material fell past him and buried the mountain, and then he walked down. He was like, well, that's over. I'll walk down now. He stood there while all this shit was like, and he's like, I hate this part. No, those kind of stories fascinate me. And the fact that everybody involved, all the scientists involved, and then the journalists involved in writing the story, none of them seem to think that this is weird. The scientists are like, yeah, he was very carefully picking his way down the pyroclastic. I'm like, what the fuck? And I think that is... So that fascinates me in multiple ways. I like all the impossibilities of the story, and the fact that it definitely happened, right? That is... Those two things. I'm just like, wow, look at all this stuff. It seems impossible, but it happened, right? And then... the fact that these people are just like seem to completely unable to acknowledge how impossible all that is. They're like, well, yeah, he was a guy who walked down the mountain. I'm just like, I don't know. I love stories like that. So that's why I collect them. And I'm always telling, I'll come down here and tell Kyle, I'm like, yeah, dude, look at this. And he's like,
That's what I'm saying. Like, I so many of these, like this one, I don't even know what to do with it. Like when like the guy in the airplane, that vanishes out of the airplane.
Yeah.
I'm just like, well, I immediately try to come up with some. Well, maybe he, got out the door. Yeah, but it'd be so hard to do. Blah blah blah. Yeah, I don't know.
Right, and that one is that one's less. That one's got more wiggle room.
Right,
but this one has no wiggle room.
Right, but my inclination is to like when it's so impossible that I can't come up with some conceivable explanation. I just like I don't know what to do with it. Like
right. So what I do with it is I hold it and I'm like, this is badass. This is proof that that the universe is more awesome than we know. Like, I'm just like, this happened.
Yeah.
And it's fucking impossible, which means it's not impossible, which is badass.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and that's what I get out of like thinking about all of those stories together. Is
Yeah.
like what I need to do is realize that what I think is impossible is obviously an illusion.
Right. Some like falsely imposed limitations.
Right.
That come about because of paradigms or whatever. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I love those.
Which is another thing about the 411 stories. You know,
Yeah.
the missing person stories. Every single one of them has all of these impossible elements.
Right.
And it's challenging to just take that information in like David Paulides does and not try to come up with an answer like all of the other people and the researchers try to do when they're doing it. They just like and just like
answer. No.
just like you know, an archaeologist or someone looking at the Great Pyramid would just be like, well, you know, they did it, so we can do it and it's doable.
Beavers.
It's like, yeah, yes, on the one hand, walking down the mountain on the pyroclastic flow is obviously doable because there's the footprints, but it should challenge what we believe, you know.
Yeah, that's why I like to pick it apart. I'm like, so somebody did it. Given, here's why they shouldn't have been able to, according to what we know.
I guess my problem with it is that like with the pyramid, I can look at that and work on it. Like I can really work on like how could this be done, you know? Whereas like this thing, I'm just kind of stuck with like it was done and there's no way for me to figure out how.
Yeah. The point of these stories to me are not to figure anything out, but just to like, it is to hold it and be like, here is something that cannot be explained.
That's part of my nature where like I hold something, I want to take it apart. I want to look at all the things and figure out how it works. And they're, you know, like you hand me a brick and the brick does some amazing stuff and like
it's made out of a bunch of black boxes.
Yeah. This brick makes pianos disappear. I'm just like, and it's all it is a brick.
Where's the actual piano disappearing part? It's in this black box that you can't open.
Yeah.
Shit.
So I'm just like, okay, well, I guess the pianos disappear with this brick, but I can't take it apart and figure out how to do it. I'm going to have to go look at something else for a while.
But just never forget that there is a brick that disappears pianos. That's all I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yes, and that's a good point. So I'm like, that's why I'm pointing. That's why I'm pointing this out. That I think this way because I realize that thinking this way is not necessarily the right way to do it. Like I need to keep those things in mind. I do need to consider them.
I chase these kind of stories. Like okay, if I was going to try to put it in a sort of a constructive way, I would say that these stories help me have an open mind to. Otherwise, what we like? Okay, so when I'm looking at something and people are like that's not possible. I'm like, well, how do you know? Like, you know, yeah, how do you know what's not possible and what is possible? I like these stories because they constantly remind me that I don't know what is and isn't possible, right?
Yeah, that's
and so
good.
when I'm looking at other stuff that other people would just totally reject because they're like, dude, that's just not. I'm just like, well, you know, like maybe we don't know how it happened, but that doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Yeah. It does the same thing for me. I was realizing that like on a case by case basis, I just when there's nowhere for me to go with it, I'm just like, let's talk about gravity. I can maybe think about stuff that do something with that.
That I think Michael Cremo calls that the he calls it it's a type of bias, but it isn't like a, you know, political bias or confirmation bias or whatever. It's that he's like when you don't know what to do with the information, when you can't categorize it, it doesn't fit in anything you understand. It goes into this this box that doesn't get connected to anything else, which means you don't often access that information because you're not never reminded of it because it doesn't connect to anything you know, and so that's the forget box. It's like this. Right? You don't put it in there to forget it on purpose. You're just like, oh, this is really interesting, but I don't know what to do with it. But then, since we live in context, nothing ever reminds you of it because you didn't connect it to anything.
Right.
So you just, you know, like for instance, I asked Mom once out of the blue, I was like, so have you ever seen like a UFO? And she told me this amazing story. And she was like, I haven't thought about that in years. Why? Because she never sees anything to remind her of it. And when I asked her, though, all the memories came flooding back because that was the first time that anything in 20 years had connected anything to that story.
Yeah.
Was my question, you know?
Man, how many times have I done that? Huh?
Right. How much stuff is in my, where is my forget box? Shit, I don't even know where it is.
I must have put that in the forget box. I've got stacks of forget boxes.
That's right. So, that's the thing about mysteries. That's why I collect them, because they don't expand your understanding. They just expand the possibility that you're willing to entertain. You know, they push the boundaries of things you're willing to entertain by saying, look, here's something else that you don't understand that definitely happened.
Yeah, and you know, there's that phrase like, what is it? Well, now I can't remember the phrase, but okay. So have faith, or if you believe it, you can do it. Right.
Right.
Like that idea. Mm-hmm. So believing that a bunch of things are impossible, or that we know that they're all impossible.
Right.
It's you can extrapolate that you'll never achieve the impossible if
That's
you
right.
don't believe that it's possible.
Who was it? Was it?
Because you won't even try, or you know.
Yeah, there was
So-
some ancient Greek philosopher. I can't remember which one it was right now, but he said, if you don't expect the unexpected, you will never find it.
Yeah. That just makes me think about magic,
Right.
specifically. Like people think that magic is a myth. It's impossible to do anything without actually doing it. Blah blah blah. But I don't know. Just for me, one of the things that I've kind of gotten rid of, one of my biases that I've gotten rid of, is that those types of things, performing magic, is impossible.
Right.
And so I started to, with that, I can actually tinker with it. Like I can take it apart and look at all these various aspects of the legends that we have of magic and all this kind of stuff, and think about, well, how could those things have happened? And even if I can't explain it in a using physics or some known, you know, understandable science that we've worked out, there's still the possibility that maybe there's something with consciousness that has to do with it. Which we don't understand consciousness, and so starting to believe that it's possible to do this type of thing, then you can begin to actually experiment with it. Why would you ever experiment with something you believe is impossible?
Right.
It's like
I'm gonna go out and do impossible experiments again.
so yeah, just that one change of mind for me has resulted in a lot of like pretty cool things that have happened.
Yeah, so I do this is kind of me doing that same thing, but I don't sit down and actually start doing lab stuff like you do. Most of my things is like I'm researching information, and so this helps me in the same way. Like these types of stories continually remind me not to discard things just because they look impossible.
Yeah.
When I'm doing research, you know, like that whole Tatra project, I never would have shown you that had I not already read a bunch of stories where you're like, where I found a bunch of information where I'm like, wow, that is crazy, you know? And like, but once you come across enough of that, you start to look at these and you're like, okay, so there's a lot of these crazy stories.
Yeah.
You know? And so it begins to normalize it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So impossible stories are great. They push the boundaries of the possible.
Right.
Yeah.
And that ties into pretty much all of this stuff that we discuss, slowly building on all of the.
Yeah, you have to build up a tolerance to the impossible.
Right, and then you can really like go, you know, look at all these now that are possible things to explain this, and that's when connections. You know, for me, I start making connections across all of this stuff. Like, man, you know, this ancient text is saying this, and this phenomenon just took place, or this unexplained thing happened, which sounds a lot like this other thing that's apparently a legend that no one believes is really true, or whatever. And it's fascinating.
Right. Think about this. Let's just take for granted for the sake of argument now that there isn't such a thing as something impossible. that there is no such thing as an impossible thing in this universe. that any, I mean, like how many ancient sages have said this? That there is nothing you cannot do if you believe you can do it. That kind of thing, right?
Possible impossibilities are the rule as opposed to the exception.
Except that we have built all these sort of cultural standards and everything, and like all of us have these giant areas where we're like, nope, can't do that. That's impossible. Right. This doesn't work. That's not. You don't even try that, right? So we've sort of encased ourselves in cages of what we believe is possible and not possible. And if we start with the assumption that like there actually isn't anything that is impossible, that is the real case, that the actual case of the universe is that nothing is impossible for a conscious mind in this universe, right? Then how do we get from where we are to there? You have to start chewing through the cage, right? You have to dig the tunnel to the and that's what I'm doing with these stories, is like trying to widen my cage. Like, okay, so I thought previously that it was impossible for a dude in barefoot to walk down a freaking boiling hot mountain after a volcano. Now I no longer think that, even though I don't understand how it worked. Somebody fucking did it.
Yeah. That is really cool.
Yeah.
I could probably come up with a pretty long list of things that I at one point thought were impossible for me to do, that once I got rid of that assumption, I was able to do it.
Right. And so like,
and why should I limit that? Like, why should I put limits on?
You're like, well, that's impossible, and then you actually do. You're like, wow, I was able to do that. But that next thing is totally impossible.
Right.
Yeah. So exactly. That's why I love these stories, because they, especially when they come out of left field. You don't expect some guy walking down a volcano barefoot. Yeah, I mean, that's not even something you would consider, but it just pushes the boundaries of the possible. All right, so
it may seem impossible, but we've already reached our next break point.
Wow.
Unless you were going to make a very awesome point.
No, I was about to move to the next subject, but we should do the break first.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break.
Wrap it out.
Snakebros. Snake break. Welcome back to Brothers of the Serpent, Snakebros, slithering, familial conversationalists. We wanted to use this last segment to talking about
one of our terms,
which is free lunch.
Right. Not really ours. I mean, people have used it, but I mean, there's the Tanstaffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch, right?
Well,
but sometimes there is a free lunch. And actually, I think we developed this because I pointed out, it struck me one day that I was like, actually, everything we do is about looking for the free lunch. Like that's how we do everything, right? You think about something as simple as getting food. That animal over there is a free lunch. You didn't have to build that material.
Right.
He built it by, there's this biological process that builds the freaking sandwich for you, basically. Not the sandwich, but the meat.
And so you have to do a couple of things. You got to get a rock.
Right. You basically got to go get the meat.
A spear. And then you just have to go get it, and that's your free lunch.
Right. So, and there, it just so happens that there's like a geological process that results in something that you can hit it a couple of times and it makes a really sharp edge easily. That's a free lunch.
Yep.
You don't have to. You just break.
You don't have to build rocks.
Right. You don't have to build rocks. You don't have to sharpen something. You just break the rock and it has a sharp edge. Right. Naturally. Those are free lunches.
Yep. So when we were talking about perpetual motion, and Russ was saying like, I don't mean forever. So we kind of apply this same concept, like if you could build an engine that generated power, or a lot of power, after you put all your time and effort and knowledge and everything into it, it wasn't free, right? But if the engine is extremely efficient, then you could, you get a couple sandwiches out of it.
Yeah.
That's what we're calling a free lunch. So it's
well, the free lunch concept is you're looking for shortcuts past very large amounts of work, right? So like the animal again, you don't have to build that protein that the meat is made out of, atom by atom. It's constructed for you, conveniently by the biological process. That is a free lunch, practically.
Right.
So just ask anybody trying to synthesize meat.
Yeah. So Russ was a while back talking about, making a hydrogen generator, basically, using the sun or whatever, using electrolysis. And you can do that with solar panels.
Yeah.
So all day long, the sun, hitting the solar panel, creating an electrical charge in salt water.
Right. So continuously generating hydrogen.
You can generate hydrogen. You can collect that hydrogen by building a system that will just collect it and then
compress it or whatever.
Compress it. Yeah.
And so you burn as needed.
So you haven't really busted your ass all day producing hydrogen. You built it one time and it's just making hydrogen every day.
Right. And the sun is burning for free.
Right. That's a free lunch right there.
Right.
So then you could take that hydrogen and burn the hydrogen and get a lot of energy, a portable energy source.
Right.
So, but you bring this up, you can make hydrogen using electrolysis, and people are immediately poo-poo it, saying, well, you can't get more energy out of the hydrogen that you put into making it.
Yeah.
Yes, but I didn't have to make it. The sun did that using this solar panel that someone else made.
Fortunately, I'm not paying for the sun.
Right.
Free lunch.
Yeah. So we like to think about that. And I, for one, had this idea because I work on AC systems, mainly in my car, because I've hit so many deer and destroyed my AC system so many times. I've had to learn how an entire AC system works.
You're talking about air conditioning, not alternating current.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. My air conditioner.
Yeah.
So I've learned how air conditioners work, and it's a pretty simple process. Really, it's using phase change of a fluid into a gas to cool.
To induce extreme cooling.
Evaporative cooling, right? So when a liquid, like when you put a pot of water on the stove and you turn it on and the water gets hot and starts boiling, what's actually happening there is the phase change from the water turning into a gas is cooling that liquid. That's why you can't raise the temperature of water above 212.
Yeah, at sea level.
At sea level. No matter how hot the stove gets, as long as that water is boiling, it's staying at 212.
Right.
And that includes the pan that you're boiling it in, like that the surface of the metal inside that's touching the water is staying roughly about 212 until all the water's gone, and then the pan will get so hot that it melts after you forget, you're boiling your water for your eggs.
Yeah. Smells like melting metal in here.
Right. So I was thinking about a free lunch using this principle because I learned about older types of refrigerators used ammonia, whereas nowadays...
On a flame, it's weird, right?
Yeah. Nowadays, air conditioning systems use Freon, and there's a bunch of different types. Thanks to the EPA, we've had to develop a whole bunch because they're all deadly. So that one gets made illegal, and then we get a new one. Anyway, Freon is the liquid we use now. But back in the day, they used ammonia, which has a totally different boiling temperature than Freon. And to get the ammonia to boil, instead of just compressing it and letting it see, Freon would boil at normal room temperature. Whereas the ammonia, you had to heat it. So they would actually put a propane or kerosene or whatever heater,
like a pilot
flame would just light on the bottom of a little bowl that had the ammonia in it, and that would cause the ammonia to boil. And when it changed to a gas, that gas absorbed lots of heat and made the pipes that flowed through extremely cold. And you blow air across those pipes and you've got a refrigerator. So I was thinking that all of these different materials have different boiling temperatures, different pressures, and all this kind of stuff. And it seemed possible to me that you could come up with a series of different liquids or different materials that you would cause to go through this process where one, the boiling temperature is high, the boiling temperature is low, and perhaps put it in such a sequence where you could get a lot more energy out of a chain reaction through multiple different substances.
Right, and then it would also come all the way back around to begin the cycle again.
Right. You use the one at the very end of the chain to cause the one that you turn to a gas to go back into a liquid.
Yeah.
Which is possible. Anyway, these ideas are free lunch ideas. We like to think about those. And if anybody out there has any free lunch ideas, and
let us know.
Let us know.
Well, what I found really is just the concept of the free lunch helps a lot, because if you set out to I want to make some kind of power generator that puts out more energy than I have to put in to keep it going. Well, that's one way to think about it. Or if you're like, I want to make a perpetual motion machine that doesn't have to go to the end of the universe, just needs to go for a long time. That's another sort of abstract way to think about it. But thinking about it in terms of what I'm looking for is a free lunch. I'm looking for some shortcut past this energy problem. Right, and the shortcut will be based on the way different materials react to different things, and if I can get the right sequence of materials doing these reactions, I should get a cycle that goes around and around and around, and in doing so generates enough excess energy for me to pull off the system without shutting it down, and then I can use that energy.
Right, and that's what Nikola Tesla was doing. I mean, he was looking for better sources of power and better sources of energy than what they had at the time. And almost everything that he was attempting to do, people thought was impossible.
Yeah.
And they poo-pooed it, and then he would build it and it would work and just blow people away. And he achieved essentially the free lunch thing and so many of his inventions, but now we don't consider it a free lunch.
Right.
But it was in his time, because what it cost people to get, not even close to what the stuff that he invented was able to do, was far, far more than what we deal with today.
Right.
And we can using Tesla's inventions, we can use water falling basically in a river downhill to
That's a free lunch.
power all of our houses and lights and microwaves. And
that water falls down that hill and then runs off into the ocean. And then as the sun evaporates it, draws it way up into the sky, where it then rains in a higher place, which then flows down the river, which then falls down the mountain, and it's a free lunch.
That's a free lunch.
That's a free lunch, because all the work is done of moving the water back up to the top is done for you automatically. That's
Right.
the free lunch part.
So another idea that I had for a free lunch was using that very principle. Like we see, I was thinking about a hydroelectric dam, and really that is just water falling.
Yeah.
And we're using the water falling to generate power. But what Russ just described is a process that we can actually enclose. So you could imagine, say, a big water tank, very, very, very wide water tank, but very shallow, and a black bottom,
Yeah.
and a glass top. And in the daytime, the sun would heat that pool up so much that a bunch of that water would evaporate, and the gas could rise up a tower into a tower, which you could build basically an insulated tower that becomes a rain room, so the tower stays cool, and the water beads up in the tower and collects into a vat way up high, and then that water is channeled down a pipe that runs through a small turbine.
Yeah.
That generates power. So you don't have to be near a river. You just have to get water to the place and build this chamber that's basically imitating the cycle that happens naturally every single day.
Right.
And you could have hydroelectric power in your backyard, for example.
Yeah.
And obviously you'd have to build one of these things on a large scale. The larger scale that you built, the more energy you'd be able to get out of it. The more free lunches you'd be able to get. So that's the kind of stuff I like to think about. Another one, just throw it out there. I was looking at my compass, and I'm holding my compass in my hand, and I start spinning it around. And that needle there's enough force in the electromagnetic force of the Earth to keep that needle pointing north, even while I'm like rotating the compass as fast as I can in my hand.
Or south when it's...
Or south when I reverse the polarity with my... Because I put it in the same pocket as some huge powerful magnet that I bought. Yeah. Then it didn't work as well because
we almost got lost and died that day.
Russ busted out his phone and was like, no, north is this way. I'm like, no, dude, this is
my compass.
Your phone's all messed up.
This compass is badass. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm not going to describe it in detail, but I basically came up with an idea of using that very weak but constant force
with Earth's magnetic field.
Of Earth's magnetic field to spin a propeller that when one of the propeller blades is just aside from south, slightly degree off from south, it comes out into like there's a glass top on it, and the sun can charge a solar panel that's on it, which charges an electromagnet, which is then pulled to north. So the propeller pulls around. The other propellers are in shade, the shaded part of the structure, so they're not in the sun. But once that propeller that's in the sun reaches north, immediately it goes under the shade, and the next propeller is now out, visible to the sun, and it becomes charged and keeps pulling it north. And so with a bearing that's good enough, you could get this, you just set this thing out there and it would begin to spin, and it would continue to spin faster and faster and faster. Maybe the acceleration would be very slow, but if it was heavy enough and it had enough inertia, you might be able to draw some power off of it. It would be a simple thing to build just to test it for fun, right? Free lunch.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for here. So
one of my favorite Tesla stories is the one where the journalist follows him up the mount, I guess they were at that mountain in Colorado, Pikes Peak.
I don't know.
It's called Pikes Peak. It's
the
not
one where he has
Polly's Peak is the one we have here, right? That's Polly's Peak.
Yeah, we have Polly's Peak.
Right,
here.
so it's Pikes Peak in Colorado. Yeah, and it's a big, giant granite mountain in Colorado, and like he has these two, what are they called? They were like automatic guitars or something like that. They were some weird thing that we don't really have now, but they were basically like stringed instruments that you could kind of program to play.
I think it was a thing where you
could poke it.
You push keys that play chords on the thing.
Right. So he had two of these, and he had spent the journalist like talked about how like before they left, Tesla had spent a lot of time like very carefully tuning these things perfectly with each other. Right, so that they were just perfectly in tune with each other, and then he gives one to his friend, and that guy goes up the mountain on the opposite side. So then Tesla and the journalist go up the mountain on the on the opposite side from the friend. So they have 4 miles of granite between them when they get to the top, because the very top of the peak is just like it's solid granite. So, and they get up there, and the friend had instructions to somehow connect. The journalist isn't clear on how this is being done because he watches Tesla do it, and he's like, yeah, he basically is plugging the instrument into the mountain somehow. He's got wires coming off of its output, and he's connecting them to the granite, and the friend is doing the same thing on the other side. And the friend is a musician. So once they're done, Tesla very carefully sets his instrument down on the ground, and him and the journalist just wait, and eventually his instrument begins to play this song that his friend is playing on his guitar on the other side of the mountain through 4 miles of granite, and somehow those resonances are being transmitted. And this blew the reporter's mind. He was just like, "Oh my God!" Somehow it's being transmitted through 4 miles of granite and through the wires and into Tesla's, and it's playing the same song that his friend is playing on the other side of the mountain. That was just a great story, like that kind of stuff. Who thinks of that? Like, I could plug this into this mountain.
And what he was testing was, I believe, I'm not sure in this story, but mechanical resonance.
Right.
Basically through the earth.
Yeah.
And you have to have obviously tuned very, very precisely. So.
Yeah, I just wonder what he was transmitting with. Like, what were the wires for?
I don't remember. I'd have to look up that story and see exactly what was going on. But I know that he was working on what he called his mechanical oscillators,
Right.
which were basically like a piston moving back and forth very rapidly inside of a cylinder. And he basically built this ingenious piston that is so very simple that when you put compressed air into the cylinder, the piston at rest is in the center of the cylinder, and you would have to jog the cylinder to one side to get the piston to slide to one end, which would compress air in one side of the cylinder and pull a vacuum in the other. But once you got that initial motion going, the piston would want to kind of wobble back and forth, but he would add compressed air to it, and there was an outlet. So the compressed air would go in and keep, when the piston was on one side, it charged the side that the piston was closest to and pushed it the other direction. And the motion of the piston passing the orifices into the cylinder caused the pressure to then change to the other side that the piston was approaching, and then pressurize that. So it kept this piston oscillating back and forth and back and forth, and he could get it what he called constant period. In other words, that the frequency was very, very constant and exact. So it wouldn't get faster or slower. It would remain at the same frequency.
Right.
So he could finely tune them. And it was fairly small. Once he described one of them that was small enough to fit in his coat pocket. But he could take this thing and basically bolt it or fix it to a structure or a stone or whatever, and sit there and fine tune it until he got the piston to resonate or oscillate at the resonant frequency of whatever structure he had put it on, and begin to channel that vibration throughout. In one case, he did it on a steel building that was being built, and got the whole freaking steel erection humming to the point that it scared the workers that were actually up there working on it, and they came down. They were just like, oh. And he even
it might look like a little vibration to you down here, but up there, it's
Yeah.
swinging way back and forth.
Yeah. And just from testing his mechanical oscillators in multiple different scenarios, he deduced that he could build one of sufficient size and bolt it to the earth, in a specific place, like on a mountain of granite or whatever.
Yeah.
And tune it to a frequency that was some harmonic of the Earth's resonant frequency, and be able to send that vibration throughout the entire world. And thereby you could then take that mechanical oscillation vibration, which in at certain frequencies, humans wouldn't necessarily be able to hear it if it was below audible tone, and you wouldn't be able to feel it, but you could put the same device anywhere on the planet and bolt it down to the ground, and the one that you're using power to move would channel that vibration into the other, and the other would begin to move the same. So using that resonance, he could pick up the energy anywhere else in the world. And resonance is interesting because it is a free lunch. Like you can get with a very small amount of energy, a very large thing resonating that is what they call sustain.
Right.
And sustain is a free lunch because you can draw energy off of something that has sustain without sufficiently deadening the resonance. So.
Right.
Anyway, that's really cool stuff. We'll probably talk quite a bit more about Tesla in future podcasts. Russ did a lot of research on his wireless power system. We both have looked into that quite a bit. We're definitely going to do some stuff on that in
We've
the
done some
future.
experiments on that too, and some other things he's done as well.
Yes. Tesla is my hero. Just know it.
Birds.
Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for Brothers of the Serpent podcast number 3.
Number 3. Tres.
So thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it.
See you next time.
See you next time. No, wait.
Impossible blocks.
We won't see you.
Snakes.